here to discuss what's going on in Israel with Hamas and what is going on in Iraq with ISIS. Is someone very much in the know. He's the director of the Douglas and Sarah Allison Center for Foreign and National Security Policy at the Heritage Foundation. It's Stephen Bucci. Steve, we welcome you back to America's Forum.
Thanks for having me back again.
Well, Steve, so far it appears no one has broken this ceasefire in Israel. Should we take that as a hopeful sign?
We should. I'm not ready to put my feet up and say it's all done yet, but this is a good sign. It's better than them shooting at one another. So hopefully this ceasefire will hold and we'll move towards a realistic agreement as to what will be allowed and what won't be allowed as we go forward.
Speaking of what may be allowed and perhaps what will not be allowed, last week we understand those talks failed in part because Israel rejected the demand of Hamas for a complete end to the blockade. Do you think Israel would end that blockade? Is that perhaps one of the terms at work here?
I would be very surprised if Israel agreed to that. Hamas has proven itself to be not terribly trustworthy as far as what they bring in and what they do with it, even under the blockade. If you opened it up, I think Israel would be putting itself at risk. But hopefully there'll be some accommodations made in conjunction with the government in Egypt as well that we'll be able to move forward with in a progressive way.
Stephen, much of the world's media has focused on Hamas and what Hamas wants to see. What terms does Israel have out there that could be considered perhaps negotiable in this give and take?
Well, I mean, frankly, Israel just wants Hamas to stop shooting at them and stop building tunnels to try and do terrorist attacks within Israel. That's all they've wanted since this terrain was turned over to the Palestinians so many years ago. How you get to the point where you can guarantee that when you're negotiating opponent or partner, depending on your point of view, is Hamas, I'm not sure. But that's really what Israel wants.
Various intelligence agencies and international press releasing a disturbing story yesterday that Hamas was actually killing some of the tunnel builders, that excavators who had believed to have some contact with the Israelis in the wake of the IDF's incursion into Gaza have now been killed. Have you heard about that? Can you vouch for the accuracy of those reports?
I cannot vouch for the accuracy of them. I have heard the reports. I hope that's not true, but Hamas has not exactly been sort of loose with its interaction with the population there in Gaza. If you cross Hamas, you're putting yourself at risk. So it remains to be seen whether these reports are accurate, but it's not exactly that far off from Hamas's personality, if you will.
Now, in terms of those tunnels, I understand Israel is working full-time on a type of ground radar to detect what is going on. Have they made substantial progress, or is this still going to have to be a boots-on-the-ground, carefully scrutinized situation there along the border with Gaza?
Well, now that Israel went in and saw the extent, the number of the tunnels, the sophistication of the tunnels, they can better use the technology that they have to try and monitor that border to detect the building of tunnels as we go forward. Once you know what you're looking for, it's a little easier to find it. So hopefully Israel will be able to put in technological measures that will preclude them from having to go in with boots on the ground again. But obviously the hope is that Hamas will stop building the darn tunnels. But that remains to be seen.
Let's move now from Israel to Iraq and talk about the fact that the president has ordered airstrikes. Some have described the airstrikes thus far as pinpricks. We've seen reports today, indeed our parent website Newsmax.com speaks of over 100 missions over Iraq today, but obviously all those missions do not involve dropping munitions. What is your take on the use of air power thus far to try and control ISIS?
Well, it's better than not doing anything. The humanitarian piece has been working. We were getting some food and water to the Yazidi minority that's trapped on Mount Sinjar. Some of the combat strikes have destroyed ISIS's some of their weapons, some of the tanks, the self-propelled artillery pieces that they captured, but it's really not enough to discourage them or to drive them off. The Pentagon spokesman just earlier today said, look, we're not saying that anything we're doing is a lasting solution. This is just the start. They need to do a lot more than what they're doing if they're really going to drive ISIS off or put any real damage on them as a military organization.
One other thing that has been done that was asked for, it looks like our nation is finally helping to arm the Kurds. And while that's an important development, maybe you want to talk about that. But let's get back, before we go there, to the notion of air power. What could we unleash? People say there's no replacing boots on the ground. But air power can get some substantial things done, can it not?
It can, but not all by itself. You know, you do need boots on the ground, but they don't necessarily have to be American boots. I mean, if you use the model of Afghanistan right after 9/11, when we first went in there, where we used the forces of the Northern Alliance, local military forces with embedded United States military special operations forces, Green Berets like I used to lead, who then controlled the air power, directed it to hit specific designated targets, you can get a lot more effect out of it. I'd like to see us go to that sort of model here, where we work with the Iraqi military, with the Peshmerga, perhaps with some of our regional allies, the Turks or the Jordanians, but with American special operations forces and a lot more air than what we're seeing there now. We might be able to have a lot more effect in that manner.
A couple of minutes remain. Stephen, let's go from the battlefield to the battle being waged in social media. We've all been horrified by the beheadings that have come out of the area around Mount Sinjar involving ISIS. But ISIS, curiously enough, has set up, I guess it's Islamist equivalent of the Lonely Hearts Club, trying to attract American women to join their cause. Is that something we should take seriously?
We should. We've had incidents in the past where Islamic groups have done recruiting online of women, in some cases, you know, blonde-haired American women, who then signed up to marry some of these guys, were radicalized by this online methodology, and were willing to take action. There's one gal that they refer to as Jihad Jane, who was ready to fly to Holland to murder someone at the behest of a different Islamic group, not this one. So the fact that these guys, who are actually pretty astute with social media, would be using this to recruit and radicalize Americans is not surprising, and it's something we need to take seriously and try and counter.
Because if women can be directed to carry out acts of violence in Europe, obviously the same thing could happen here on our shores, whether they go over to seek romance with the jihadists or not. Stephen Bucci, as always, we appreciate your perspective this morning from the Heritage Foundation. Thanks so much.
Thank you for having me.
Well, you heard it from Steve Bucci. The social experience in terms of social media, a real threat. Why don't you react to that via social media? We'd love your comments. Why don't you tweet them to us at NewsmaxTV, hashtag America's Forum. There is also newsmaxtv.com/comment. And don't forget Facebook, y'all. You can get to us on Facebook at facebook.com/Newsmax. America's Forum continues following this timeout.